The night my stepmother grabbed the microphone and called me her husband's little charity project in front of 400 people. I was standing close enough to watch her smile while she said it. She did not whisper. She did not hesitate. She leaned into that mic the way people do when they want everyone in the room to hear, and she said it like it was funny, like it was the kind of thing you could say about a person and then smooth over with a laugh. The people at her table laughed. My father looked at his drink. My half-sister, who had flown in from Chicago for this event, turned away so slowly it almost looked natural. Then the woman standing at the podium, the one who had organized this entire evening, cleared her throat. She said, "Before we continue, there's something the room should know about our guest of honor tonight." And that was the moment everything my stepmother believed about me stopped being true. I grew up understanding, in the way children understand things before they have words for them, that I was a problem that had been incorporated into a life rather than a person who belonged in one. My father remarried when I was 6. I have almost no memory of the years before that. What I have instead is the texture of what came after. The particular silence at dinner when I spoke, the way my stepmother would look at me when she thought I wasn't watching, something between patience and inconvenience. She was not cruel in the ways that leave marks. She fed me, clothed me, enrolled me in school. She showed up to exactly enough events to satisfy whatever internal checklist she kept. But there is a kind of absence that is worse than cruelty, a deliberate withholding of warmth that communicates everything without saying anything, and she had mastered it completely. I learned very early that I was permitted to exist in that house, but not to take up too much space. My half-sister was 4 years younger than me and treated like something precious. I do not blame her for this. She was a child. She absorbed the attention she was given the same way I absorbed its absence, and we both grew into the shapes our family made for us. She had ballet lessons and piano recitals and summers at a camp in Vermont. I had a library card and the particular discipline that comes from understanding that no one is going to hand you anything. My father was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that, not for his sake, but for accuracy. He was distracted mostly. He had built a small real estate business in Northern Virginia, and it required more of him than he had to give, which meant the people around him got what was left. My stepmother got the evenings. My half-sister got the weekends. I got the nod across the dinner table that meant he had registered my presence and considered his obligation fulfilled. The one thing I was certain of, by the time I was 12, was that no one in that house was going to save me, not out of malice, just out of the particular blindness that comes from never needing to look. So I stopped waiting to be seen and started figuring out how to move. I was good at math. Specifically, I was good at the kind of math that most of my classmates found tedious. The long, patient work of finding patterns in numbers, of building models that described how things moved. My teachers noticed before I did. My sophomore year in high school, my calculus teacher pulled me aside after class and asked if I'd ever thought about applying for the summer research program at George Mason. I had not thought about it because I had not known it existed. She handed me the application and told me I should fill it out. I did not tell my stepmother about the program. I filled out the application at the library, got the recommendation letters without involving my family, and submitted everything myself. When the acceptance letter came, I intercepted it from the mail and told my father about it at dinner in the flattest possible terms, the way you present information to someone when you are not asking for permission, only providing an update. He said, "Huh? Good for you." My stepmother refilled her water glass. That summer changed something in me, not dramatically. I did not arrive at the program and suddenly discover my destiny. It was more specific than that. I met people who thought the way I thought, who found the same things interesting, who did not treat my precision as a personality flaw. A professor who supervised the research component told me, near the end of the summer, that I had a genuinely unusual ability to see structural problems that other people walked past. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was simply a true thing about me, and I stored that observation somewhere I did not touch often because it mattered too much to examine carelessly. College was William and Mary on a merit scholarship. I told my family when I had already enrolled. My stepmother said the campus was pretty. My father said he was proud, in the voice he used when he had not been paying close enough attention to know what he was proud of. My half-sister asked if I was going to be far away. I said yes. She seemed relieved and sad at the same time, the way you feel when someone you were supposed to love is finally leaving and you realize you never really got to know them. I studied economics and finance. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus business office, not because I needed the money exactly, but because I wanted to understand how money moved inside institutions, the small decisions that accumulated into culture, the patterns that most people in the building could not see because they were too close to them. I graduated with honors and a job offer from a mid-sized asset management firm in DC, and I moved into an apartment in Clarendon that I furnished slowly, one piece at a time with things I had chosen myself. My family and I maintained a kind of polite distance that suited everyone. I came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I sat at the table, smiled at the appropriate moments, and listened to conversations about my half-sister's life. Her job at a PR firm, her boyfriend, her apartment in Lincoln Park, while my own life went unremarked upon because nobody asked, not out of cruelty, out of habit, out of the deeply ingrained assumption that I was fine. I was always fine. I required nothing. I was not fine, exactly. But I had long since stopped expecting them to know the difference. The work was what saved me, not in a dramatic way, not a sudden discovery of purpose or a moment of transformation. In a slow, grinding, accumulating way, I was good at what I did, and being good at something, genuinely and verifiably good, turns out to be one of the few things in life that does not require anyone else's cooperation. I could produce analysis that was simply correct. The market either validated my models or it did not. No one's opinion of me changed that. After 3 years at the asset management firm, I moved to a boutique infrastructure investment group that specialized in public-private partnerships, the kind of deals where municipal governments work with private capital to fund transit systems, water treatment plants, broadband expansion, unglamorous work, exactly the kind of thing I had noticed at the campus business office, structural problems hiding in plain sight, money moving badly through systems that needed someone to redesign the plumbing. I was good at it, better than I had expected. I had a specific talent for identifying where the risk was actually located in a deal versus where everyone assumed it was, and this turned out to be extremely valuable in a field where most people were working from the same assumptions and getting the same results. My name started appearing in places, not prominently. A conference program here, a trade publication quote there. The kind of visibility that registers inside an industry and nowhere else. My family knew nothing of this. I had stopped mentioning my work to them sometime around year 2 at the firm when I had given my stepmother a one-paragraph summary of a deal we had closed and watched her eyes lose focus before I finished the second sentence. There was a woman in the infrastructure space named Dr. Tremblay. Elaine Marsh, not my family's Elaine, a different person, who had spent 15 years building a nonprofit that worked on municipal finance reform, helping under-resourced cities restructure their debt and redirect capital toward infrastructure that actually served their residents. I had followed her work for years from a distance, reading every paper she published, attending her panels at conferences, understanding that what she was doing mattered in a way that my private sector work, however technically impressive, did not quite reach. We met at a conference in Atlanta in the fall when I was 31. She was sharp and direct and had no patience for the kind of hedging that passed for sophistication in most financial conversations. We talked for 2 hours at a side panel, then continued over dinner, and by the end of the evening we had mapped out the rough shape of something we might build together, a hybrid model, part nonprofit, part investment vehicle, designed to move capital into infrastructure projects in communities that private investors typically overlooked. It took 2 years to structure, another year to raise the initial fund. The regulatory work alone would have broken someone less patient, but I had been patient my entire life. Patience was one of the few things I had in surplus. We launched quietly. The work was real and it was hard and it was right, and that combination turned out to be enough. Cities that had been trying to finance water system upgrades for a decade suddenly had a viable path. Rural counties that had been on a list for broadband expansion for years found a partner who could close the deal. The fund grew because the results were real, and real results in a field full of promises are extremely easy to track. By the time I was 34, we were managing a fund that had deployed over $800 million. We had been written up in the Stanford Social Innovation Review and in 2 pieces in The Atlantic. The governor of Virginia had cited our work in a public address. None of this had reached my family. My stepmother did not read The Atlantic. My father did not follow infrastructure finance. My half-sister was busy with her own life, as people are. The gala was the Society for Community Infrastructure's annual awards dinner, held at a hotel in Washington, D.C. The kind of event that fills a ballroom with the particular category of people who understand that unglamorous work is often the most important kind. I had attended it several times as a guest. This year, I was being honored. The Civic Innovation Award, given annually to an individual or organization that had demonstrated measurable impact in the field. I accepted the invitation without drama. It was a professional obligation, and I was glad for it. I did not think about my family. And then my stepmother called. She had been invited, she explained, by one of her friends, whose husband sat on the society's board. The whole family was planning to come. My father, my half-sister, even my half-sister's boyfriend. It would be lovely, she said, to see me there. Her voice had the particular quality it always had when she was performing warmth rather than feeling it. Pleasant and slightly elevated, like a recording of friendliness rather than the real thing. I said it would be nice to see them. I did not tell her why I would be at the event. I hung up and sat very still for a while, feeling the particular weight of two things about to collide. I did not plan what happened next. I want to be precise about this. I did not call the event organizers and ask them to do anything differently. I did not engineer the evening. I simply continued doing what I had been doing for years, which was showing up and doing the work, and I trusted that the truth, when it arrived, would arrive on its own timeline. The ballroom held 400 people and smelled like the specific combination of floral arrangements and ambition that characterizes every event of this type. I arrived early, as I always do, greeted the organizers, spoke with colleagues I had not seen since the previous year's conference, and reviewed the evening's program with the particular focus I bring to anything I am responsible for. My family arrived together, 40 minutes later. My stepmother, in something sequined, that caught the light. My father in a dark blazer. My half-sister with her boyfriend, who was tall and looked slightly uncertain about where to direct his eyes. They found their table. Toward the back, guests of someone else, peripheral, and settled in with the comfortable ease of people who assume they belong everywhere. My stepmother saw me across the room and waved with the enthusiasm of someone who has not seen you in a while, which was accurate. I walked over. We exchanged the usual information. How was the drive? Good to see you. You look well. My father gave me a side hug that ended before it really began. My half-sister introduced her boyfriend, who shook my hand and said he had heard a lot about me, which I doubted. I made the small talk that the situation required and then excused myself to return to the front of the room where my place was set. My stepmother's eyes followed me as I walked toward the front table. I did not turn around. I did not need to see her expression to know that she was recalibrating, filing away the information that I was seated at a table that mattered, trying to construct an explanation that did not require her to revise anything significant. The dinner proceeded. Awards were given. Speeches were made. I participated in the conversations at my table and smiled at the appropriate moments and ate very little, my attention divided between the present and the approaching moment I had been carrying since my stepmother's phone call. Dr. Marsh was presenting the Civic Innovation Award. She and I had spoken briefly beforehand. She knew about my family, had met my stepmother once at a professional event 2 years prior, and described the experience afterward as clarifying. She had not asked me what I wanted her to do. She was going to do what she always did, which was tell the truth with precision and without apology. She took the podium and began the introduction. She spoke about the problem that our fund had been built to solve. The infrastructure financing gap in communities that private capital ignored. She spoke about the structural work required to bridge that gap. She spoke about what it took to do it honestly, without over-promising, without taking shortcuts that would shift risk onto the communities we were supposed to be serving. The room was attentive. 400 people who had spent their careers in this field listening to someone describe work they recognized and respected. That was when my stepmother said it. She leaned toward my father, meaning to whisper, "I think," but the room was quiet enough that it carried, and she said, in the tone she had always reserved for remarks about me, "God, I hope whoever this isn't another one of his charity projects. Like, another person we're supposed to feel sorry for." My half-sister looked at her hands. My father said nothing. The boyfriend stared at the centerpiece. 400 people heard it. I know this because I watched faces shift, watched people within range register what had happened, and then look immediately toward the front of the room to see what would come next. Dr. Marsh had heard it too. I saw it in the fraction of a second where she paused, the minute adjustment of her posture, the decision she made so quickly it looked effortless. She continued exactly as planned. She said, "The person I'm about to introduce has spent the last 4 years restructuring how capital moves into the communities that need it most. She has done this without shortcuts, without press releases, without asking for recognition of any kind. She has simply done the work. $800 million deployed, 12 cities served, measurable outcomes that the field has spent 20 years trying to achieve. She is the founder and managing partner of what I consider the most important infrastructure investment vehicle operating in the United States right now, and it is my genuine honor to give her this award." She looked at me, said my name, Evangeline. I stood up. The room stood up with me. I watched to the front, past tables of colleagues who were applauding with the specific warmth of people who had watched the work and knew what it had cost, and I stepped up to the podium and turned around and looked out at 400 faces, and in the back of the room I found the three I knew best. And I watched the moment when everything my stepmother had decided about me stopped being true. Her expression did not collapse. It was more specific than that. It moved through a sequence, confusion, then a kind of rapid recalculation, then something that looked like the onset of understanding, which is different from understanding itself, because it requires you to acknowledge that you have been wrong, and that is a process, not a moment. My father's face was still. He had always been still when things happened that he had not prepared for. My half-sister's boyfriend had stopped staring at the centerpiece and was now looking at me with the open curiosity of someone encountering new information without the complication of history. I did not hurry. The moment had weight, and I let it have it. I said, "I built this fund because the problem was real and the tools to solve it existed and nobody had put them together in the right order yet." I said, "The work is not glamorous. Water pipes are not glamorous. Broadband in rural counties is not glamorous. Debt restructuring for cities that are drowning in obligations they cannot meet is not glamorous. But it is what people need, and what people need is, in the end, the only thing worth working on." I paused. I said, "I learned early that being underestimated is a gift if you know how to use it. People who do not take you seriously stop watching you. And when nobody's watching, you can build anything." The applause was the kind that keeps going after it starts, the kind where people are not sure they want it to stop yet. I thanked Dr. Marsh and the society and the teams I had worked with, and I stepped back from the podium and let the evening continue. My stepmother came to find me an hour later, near the end of the cocktail reception that followed the dinner. She moved through the crowd with the careful precision of someone who was not certain of her welcome, which was new. She'd always been certain. Certainty was her baseline. She stood in front of me and said, "You should have told us." I looked at her for a moment. I thought about all the dinners where my news had not been asked about. All the Christmas mornings where the conversation had moved around me like water moving around a stone. All the years of being fine, always fine, fine by default because no one had thought to check. I said, "You never asked." She opened her mouth and closed it. I watched her construct a response and abandon it and construct another one. Finally, she said, "We just always assumed you were doing okay." I said, "I was. That's not the point." She did not have an answer for that. I had not expected her to. My father found me near the exit as the event wound down. He was holding his coat. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just looking at him differently, the way you look at someone when you have stopped needing them to be something they're not. He said, "I owe you more than I gave you." It was the most direct thing he had said to me in 30 years. I could hear how much effort it had cost him. A man who had spent his life being oblique, to say something that specific and that true. I said, "Yes, you do." He nodded. He did not try to fill the space. I respected him more for that than I had for most things. My half-sister caught me just outside the ballroom doors, without her boyfriend, without her mother's particular energy around her. She looked the way she always looked when she was being herself rather than performing. Slightly uncertain, slightly younger than her actual age. She said, "I want to understand what you built. I want to actually understand it. Can I call you?" I said, "Yes." "Call me." She hugged me then, a real one, the kind that acknowledges the distance between people rather than pretending it does not exist. I held on for a moment. She smelled like the same shampoo she had used since high school, which is the kind of detail that accumulates into memory without your permission. I drove home alone that night, through the particular emptiness of DC at midnight. The monuments lit and the streets quiet, the city in the specific peace it settles into when the business of the day is done. I did not feel victorious. Victory implies a competition, and I had stopped competing with my family's understanding of me years before this evening. What I felt was something closer to completion. Not the end of something, but the closing of a loop that had been open for a very long time. The work continued as it always does. The fun did not pause for my personal history. Cities still needed water systems. Counties still needed bandwidth. The structural problems that I built my career on identifying and solving did not become less structural because a ballroom full of people had finally learned my name. I thought, in the weeks that followed, about what it means to be seen by the people who were supposed to see you first, and to find, when it finally happens, that their recognition lands differently than you imagined it would. Not cold, exactly, not unwelcome, but lighter than expected, less essential. My stepmother sent a card, handwritten, which I knew would cost her something. She wrote that she was proud of me, that she was sorry it had taken this long, that she hoped we could do better. The words were sincere. I could tell because they were imprecise, not the polished language of performance, but the awkward language of someone actually trying to say something true. I put the card in a drawer. I did not throw it away. My father started calling every few weeks. Short calls, nothing sustained, but consistent in a way that was new. He asked about the fund. He asked about specific projects in a way that suggested he had been reading about infrastructure finance, which meant he had been paying attention, which meant something had shifted in him. Some recognition that there was a world I lived in that he did not know and had never tried to know. We were not close. We were not suddenly close. But we were in contact in a way that was real rather than obligatory. And at this point in my life, real feels like enough to work with. My half-sister called 3 weeks after the gala, as she said she would. We talked for 90 minutes. She asked careful questions and listened to the answers, which is rarer than people admit. She told me near the end of the call that growing up she had always assumed I had something she didn't. Some self-sufficiency that made support unnecessary, and that she had only recently understood that what she had been interpreting as independence was adaptation. That word, adaptation, sat with me afterward. She was right. I had adapted. I had adapted so thoroughly and so early that the adaptation had become invisible, even to people who should have been able to see past it. I had needed what everyone needs, and I had simply learned not to show the need, because showing it had never changed anything. I do not regret the adaptation. It made me who I am. But I want to be precise about what it cost, not for anyone else's accounting, but for my own. It cost me the softness of being supported. It cost me the particular kind of confidence that comes from having someone in your corner who is not also your competition. It cost me years of deciding not to try for things I might have tried for if I had believed that failure was survivable. Those are real losses, not dramatic ones. Not the kind that make for clean stories, but real. What I built instead. The discipline, the patience, the ability to work in the dark for years without external validation. Those are real too. I would not trade them, but I want to be honest about what they replaced. I'm 35 now. The fund is 4 years old and growing. We have a team of 16 people who are excellent at their work and believe in what we are doing, and we have a waiting list of municipalities that want to work with us because we have demonstrated that we will do what we say we will do, which turns out to be a fairly rare quality in this industry. I think sometimes about the girl who intercepted her own acceptance letter from the mailbox, who filled out scholarship applications at the library, who drove herself to college move-in day because there was no one available to help, and she did not want to make it into something. I think about what she understood at 6 and at 12 and at 18 that nobody had told her. That she was going to have to build her own foundation because the one she had been born onto was not going to hold her weight. She was right. She built it. The family beggar, my stepmother called me. In front of 400 people, into a working microphone in a room full of colleagues who had spent the evening watching me receive an award for changing how their field operates. She meant it as a reduction, as a way of making me smaller than the room I was standing in. What she did not understand, what she had never understood, is that I had stopped needing her to make me large or small a very long time ago. I had my own measurements. I had built my own scales. The charity project owns the fun now. Not because she was wrong about who I was, because she was so completely wrong that it left me no choice but to find out for myself. I have thought a lot about what my stepmother actually meant when she said those words. Not the surface of them. The charity project line was almost too on the nose to be interesting. What I mean is, what was underneath? The assumption that made those words feel safe to say out loud, in public, into a microphone. She said it because she had spent nearly 30 years constructing a version of me that required no revision. I was a fixed point in her understanding. I was the girl my father had brought into her house, the one who needed to be managed rather than known, and that identity had served a purpose for her. It kept her from having to look too closely, from having to ask questions, from having to extend anything she was not prepared to give. What she did not account for is that people do not stay fixed. They grow in the direction of whatever light they can find, even if that light is dim, even if they have to find it themselves. I found mine in a library carrel in high school, in a summer research program at George Mason, in the quiet satisfaction of building models that described how the world actually worked, rather than how people wished it did. Nobody handed me that direction. I found it because when you grow up understanding that no one is going to hand you anything, you develop a very specific skill. You learn to see what is there rather than waiting for what should be. That is not a gift. I want to be clear about that. It looks like one from the outside. The self-sufficiency, the discipline, the ability to work without applause, but it was purchased at a real cost. And the cost was the softness of being known by the people who were supposed to know you first. My half-sister understood that before I could say it out loud. She called it adaptation. She was right. I had adapted so thoroughly that the adaptation became invisible even to the people who had caused it. What I learned from that evening, from watching my stepmother's face move through confusion and then recalculation, and then the onset of something that was not quite understanding but was heading in that direction, is that the truth does not need your help. It does not need to be arranged or orchestrated or presented at the right moment. It simply accumulates the way competence accumulates, the way real results accumulate, and eventually the weight of it becomes impossible for even the most determined blindness to ignore. Dr. Setz. Marsh did not do anything unusual that night. She told the truth. She said what was accurate. 400 people heard it and stood up. Not because the evening had been designed for a dramatic moment, but because the work was real and they knew it. That is the only machinery that was operating. Reality eventually asserting itself. My stepmother had called me a charity project for years without saying it in so many words. The card she sent afterward was sincere. I could tell because it was clumsy, because real sincerity usually is. I put it in a drawer. I did not throw it away. That is probably the most honest thing I can say about where we are now. I think about Evangeline at 12, intercepting her own acceptance letter from the mailbox. I think about what she understood that nobody had told her. She understood that she was going to have to build her own foundation. She was right. She built it, and what she built cannot be taken from her. Not by a word into a microphone, not by 30 years of careful invisibility, not by any version of her that someone else decided was easier to manage. You carry yourself forward with what you have, you build with what is available. And if you build honestly, if you do the real work rather than the performance of it, the truth of what you have made will eventually arrive in the room on its own, whether anyone was ready for it or not.